Welcome back to Off Ball Takes. This is your host, Jarby Laws, and this is my co-host.
For Wells.
We appreciate all the support in the recent content. Before we do get started, please don't forget to like and subscribe, and follow us on Instagram and TikTok at the OBT Podcast for more content and updates.
Yeah, so we're going to go over a few more teams today. We're going to go over the Lakers, we're going to go over the Nuggets, and we're going to go over the Milwaukee Bucks. So we'll start with the Lakers. Obviously, if you're watching this Friday, you know, right? You know that on Wednesday they had a game against the Miami Heat in which they lost by 41 points, 134-93. And this has been part of a trend for this team as of late. They're 4-6 in their last 10. And you know, they've lost 6 of their, I think, last 8 or so, basically. So, I mean, like, when you look at their last several games, 4 of those 6 losses were by 20 or more points. And so, when you look at kind of what's going on with this team, obviously we know going into the season, we talked about them, there was the main concern was from the defensive end of the floor, right? We weren't quite as concerned about the offense, right? But we knew that, hey, they don't have a lot of great defensive players. You're kind of hoping that you're going to get some good play out of some guys, like say like a Max Christie you need for defense, Gabe Vincent, I guess you need for defense, and then whatever else you're kind of looking for. And they've been one of the worst defensive teams in the NBA, pretty much the entire season. I mean, if you look at their, advanced stats, they're basically a bottom 5 defensive team, which, is not really what you would want to see out of a team that's trying to be good. Obviously, because if you look at the teams that are around them, defensive rating, they're 27th, right? Only 3 teams worse than them: the New Orleans Pelicans, the Washington Wizards, and the Utah Jazz. You notice something about those other 3 teams? Those 3 teams are basically the 3 worst teams in the NBA, right? The Pelicans are 4-18. Obviously, they've been incredibly injured, so they're a little bit different. The Jazz are 4-17, and then obviously the Wizards are 2-17. So you don't really want to be anywhere near those teams, right? Because if you're there with those teams, it's kind of hard to really be a serious team. And then even offensively, right? They were a top 5 team earlier in the season. They've dropped all the way down to 13th, right? And that's because if you look at these last several games, they've been horrible on the offensive end. Part of that is because, you look at LeBron, he had a really rough stretch through several games, right? Where he was kind of struggling, to crack like 15 points or so, right? Like in the Minnesota game, he had I think he was in danger of not getting to that double-digit streak. Obviously, most of the talk had been about him, although Anthony Davis is not necessarily innocent either, right? Against the Miami Heat, he had 8 points. That was probably one of his worst games he's ever played. Prior to that, he had 12 points against the Minnesota Timberwolves. But then you kind of look around the rest of the roster, right? Dalton Knecht, he's gone cold, right? D'Lo, he's been starting, right? Because Austin Reeves has been hurt. And then you just kind of look around and there's just not really enough. And then obviously they got a report coming from Shams about Jared Vanderbilt, where you actually got an actual-ish timeline in terms of his return, possibly early January, but he's been out for so long. Can you really buy that he's actually going to come back by early January? And by then, it's kind of been basically 2 lost seasons for him. And it's tough because in terms of the roster construction, which we talked about last season, even with Ham's, miscues, we knew that they didn't have enough guys on both ends of the floor and that you couldn't really just bank on, well, if we have Jared Vanderbilt, then he'll help solve our defensive issues, right? There was even a quote in that article that Shams put out where it basically said that Jared Vanderbilt's absence essentially makes it so that the Lakers front office cannot fully evaluate the needs of its roster. Now, I don't really know why that would be the case because we've talked about the issues of the roster. Everybody else has talked about the issues of the roster. And it's not just been, this season. This was a problem last season as well. So I don't really understand why you would need to wait to see what Jared Vanderbilt looks like or what he does in order to figure out what you really need. Because I think we've talked about it. Like, they need size, they need athleticism, they need two-way players, they need better bigs, right? And the bigs that they have, half of them are hurt. But even if they were healthy, they're not the greatest anyways. So just not really a lot to love right now. And then when you watch these last few games, it kind of just looks like guys have just kind of quit. Like there were a lot of plays that kind of went viral where you had a play in the Heat game where Duncan Robinson has an open shot under the basket, and then somehow they're still able to swing the ball and get a wide open three, right? So somebody wasn't guarding their man, which, seems to be the case nowadays. Lots of clips with Rui, and not just him, like other guys as well defensively. So it just looks like so far the team is not really that much different than what we really anticipated. I think both you and I thought that they wouldn't necessarily be an awful team, but I think we both kind of knew that they weren't going to be a championship level team because we said that they didn't have enough assistance on the defensive end in order to kind of assist, LeBron and Anthony Davis. So, now you're kind of in the same spot that you were last season around this time, where you're kind of where guys are basically hoping and waiting and praying, right, for roster moves that may not even come. And if they don't come, then you're basically done because again, Vanderbilt, you can't expect him to come back at this point. And even if he does, I mean, I didn't even mention that it's not even his feet that are the issue right now. It's actually he had swelling in his knee, which isn't even tied to the foot problem. Maybe it is, I don't know. But regardless, you're without him, you're without Wood. But if you need those guys, then that should already kind of spell out to you that, like, yeah, you did something wrong with this roster, right? Like, and in hindsight, like, the moves that they made last offseason, I think, the offseason before coming off the conference finals trip, they were fine, but we still said they needed to do more, right? I don't think we looked at what they did in terms of signing Gabe Vincent and Taurean Prince and said, all right, they're good. We knew they needed to do more. And the moment they didn't do anything at the deadline, then didn't do anything this past offseason, then you just kind of knew, yeah, they got off to a nice start, but part of that was because LeBron and AD were playing so well. Now they're not playing as well, and so now the team is in some serious trouble. And those guys, luckily for them, have been healthy, but who knows how long they'll be able to kind of hold on, right? Because I think LeBron is listed as questionable for this next game. That doesn't mean he won't play, but they got some serious issues right now, and it goes beyond. I know a lot of people have been criticizing the two stars for their poor play recently, but it goes beyond that. Just like we said last year, right? Like Ham was bad, but it wasn't just the coaching that was the problem. It's also the roster, and that also goes to the front office and the ownership for, whatever reason, just kind of not really, being committed to whatever it is they're doing. So who knows? But it's not looking good.
Yeah, I mean, you kind of said it the best. The reality is they're not good. You look at the roster. We've been talking about this since the off season, where it's like very underwhelming. Didn't do a whole lot except for bringing in JJ Redick. That's about it. Like that's really the only major change they had. Yeah, and Connect too. Like I mean, yeah, but I mean that was kind of like not like a lock or a guarantee, but we knew they were going to drop somebody. So that kind of goes without saying. And he's been pretty good, I think. But yeah, the reality is they're just not that good. And the games that they've dropped have been very, very bad because a lot of them have been blowouts, and I think that might be a telltale sign that something is very, very wrong. I don't know in what department outside of personnel. I don't want to go straight to coaching. I don't think it's coaching, but coming out of the halves, I have noticed that they aren't the same kind of team that fights with that same sort of intensity, so maybe lack of adjustments or, I don't know, something's going on around halftime because a lot of these games are just completely done by the third quarter. And even like you were talking about plays that went viral, like I know this isn't really like Lakers related, but like in the Utah game, I think they had the coach called a freaking timeout. Yeah. Oh, yeah. So that would have been another loss, and I think that would have been kind of debilitating. But I think the problem is
eyes and just like,
yeah, right,
just
yeah,
like, I gotta call a timeout.
For real, yeah. But I think with the Lakers, I think the ultimate blame does fall in the front office. I think for sure the I guess lack of knowing your surroundings and stuff like that is just very, very evident here because I think they think that this is, the bubble all over again where you've got, maybe a younger Bron and you've definitely got like a fully healthy Anthony Davis. That's not really the case. Like AD has been struggling with, his injury, I think in the foot or whatever. So That's
Mhm.
one of the reasons why his, play has kind of tapered off. And then obviously you're expecting a lot out of a guy who's about to be 40 or whatever in LeBron. So you kind of do expect his play to be up and down. And if those two guys are at the helm and you don't have, the surrounding pieces to kind of help those guys out when they kind of fall off a little bit in their play, you're going to get games where you're getting blown off the court or, losing close games and, there's no adjustments because you don't have the depth. You're hurt as well. Like you already talked about, the center depth is just god awful because they're hurt. And you're not getting anything on the defensive end from anybody. Like there's not a lot of two-way players out there on the floor with those guys, and I think that hurts them for sure because I think you need to surround them with 3-and-D playmakers that can actually make something happen. But there's nothing on both ends of the floor.
Yeah, and that's the kind of the wild thing is like, say even a guy like a Gabe Vincent, right, where we liked the signing at the time, and he's been better, right, as of late, but that's better from basically earlier in the season and last season where like anything more than like 2-3 points was basically a good game for him,
Yeah.
right? Like, I remember I think it was the Minnesota game, right? I was watching and the commentators, it was NBA TV, so it was like Candace Parker and a couple other people. And like they mentioned how he had like a Laker career high of like 10 points, right? And so, obviously like it kind of just goes back to with him, he was also hurt last year, right? Because that was a guy where he played like 3 games, I think, early on, and then just was gone pretty much most of the rest of the way because he had the knee surgery, came back and wasn't himself. And that's a guy that you were kind of hoping, right, to get something out of. We mentioned Vanderbilt. That's another defensive piece that you were hoping to get more out of, and he's been hurt. He hasn't been able to play. But again, at a certain point, you kind of just have to not that you have to like trade those guys, but you kind of have to like at a certain point pivot and be like, all right, we can't rely on these guys necessarily. So like we're gonna have to kind of do something else. And again, does anybody have any real faith or confidence that they're actually gonna do anything? And if they even do it, is it even gonna be a good move? I mean, I personally really don't. Maybe they do, but what is it gonna be? Like Gabe Vincent for Jonas Valanciunas? Like, okay, you got a big, but that can't be the only thing you do. If that were to happen. So, and again, this is one of the reasons why it's very difficult to go into the season with the intention of making moves at the deadline because you have to survive and you have to be able to hang on. And they were kind of able to do that right 2 seasons ago. But then, by the time they got to the postseason, right, and they got, against the Nuggets, they were kind of out of gas, right? And that was a team that from the get-go was already really good, right? The Mavs were able to do that last season and got to the finals. But again, the Celtics had already done all their stuff before the season started. So they were able to kind of go through the entire season and play, very high level basketball. So that's kind of the difficulty there. So, I mean, again, like that's the problem. Like, what is the move? Because we talked about it, right? Where it's like, yeah, LeBron and AD as a duo, probably not as good as they were 5 years ago. Because yeah, that's what happens with age and injuries. But the main thing is now they do need different types of pieces. But considering they put together a title roster, I'm kind of surprised that it seems like the job in terms of like figuring out which players to go to fit around them seems like it's incredibly difficult for these guys, which you wouldn't think it would be, but I guess for whatever reason, it is. And I think they've made it harder on themselves, right? Because, I know LeBron and AD wanted Russell Westbrook, right? But, like that was a bad decision, right? To ultimately do that by the front office, right? Because you gave up pieces that could have potentially helped you, right? And then obviously other things like, letting go of Alex Caruso and being like, well, that's okay. We have Kendrick Nunn. How did that work out? I mean, you got Rui, but like still, like Caruso is kind of like a guy that would be nice to have, right? Considering he's, a big guard that's capable of playing. He's an all NBA level guard or defense guard, all NBA defense guard. Um, I don't know. So we've talked about this 100 times, right? So this isn't something new if you've watched our, podcast before. It's just again, it's just you kind of just watch the same thing happen over and over and over again. And you just kind of wonder, when does this end? When does this stop? And it doesn't seem like it's gonna stop anytime soon. Because, how is it gonna get worse? Like is it gonna get worse before it gets better? I mean, I don't know. I mean, like some of that is also like guys like clearly are just not playing with a lot of effort. But, then there's also like other scheming stuff, like they switch everything. It's kind of hard to switch everything when you don't really have a lot of good defensive players. Not to mention, just switching in general kind of just builds bad habits, and you don't want to build bad habits with bad defensive players. So we know what they have to do. We know the types of players they need to get. You're just kind of waiting for them to do it, and if they don't do it, then they have no shot. I mean, not that you gave them a great shot anyways, but they definitely have no shot with the roster as currently constructed. Especially again, if Jared Vanderbilt just can't come back. And again, like if that's a guy that you're kind of banking your season on, then that's a problem anyways, because that shouldn't be a guy that you have to, hope and pray is healthy. And I know why, because he's the only forward that they have on their roster that, every night is like a defensive minded guy. There are things that he does that, like rebounding, and things like that can kind of make some of these lineups work. But geez, man, like, I mean, how many other teams are in that position where like a guy who's not even one of your best 4-5 players is a guy where like if you don't have him, you're kind of stuck on one end of the floor. I don't feel like most teams usually are in that position, right? Like I can understand if it's like if we don't have AD, then yeah, we're definitely stuck because that's your best player, and it's very difficult to really replace anything that he has, especially with the guys that they thought could be decent replacements anyways. But this is Vanderbilt, who I do like, but again, he shouldn't be one of your keys to success. Where, like I said, if you don't have him, then it's like, okay, well, we just can't defend. Like I don't know, because like even if he comes back, that's not gonna make it like a top and above average defense. That's not enough. That's one guy, and he's not. He's a very good defender, but he's not like an All NBA, right? He's not like a Draymond. He's not like a Jaden McDaniels. Like these All NBA level forwards. Like he's not that type of guy. He's a good defender, but he in theory shouldn't be a guy that changes your life on the defensive end. He should add to what's already like a decent defense, and they don't have that.
Yep. Yeah, I think they're cooked in terms of that. And that's the roster that they built, and I think it goes back to what we were saying in the offseason. Like you quite literally did nothing but add JJ Redick and your draft pick, and yeah, you didn't do a good job.
Like even like say with the Dalton Connect, like that's great that as a rookie he had been, was a really high level contributor for them.
Mm-hmm.
But the fact that he's got to be a high level contributor for them because he won like a handful of games for them.
Yeah.
Right. And that's kind of a sign where it's like, yeah, he's pretty good, even though he's been bad recently. But like, then that's also a bad sign that like, geez, that means like how many other guys had to be like kind of just disappointments, in order for him to kind of be in a spot where, now he's playing and he's just outplayed several guys on the roster. I mean, like the last couple of games, they've had to play two-way guys because of the injuries, at least, right?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, like guys like Armel Traore, Christian Coloco's been playing because Jackson Hayes hurt his ankle, right? Was out for a couple of weeks, comes back against the Suns, and then right in garbage time, right in like the last minute of the game, dunks, re-injures his ankle, and boom, is out again for like at least a couple of weeks. So, we've talked about it, but it's not looking too pretty over there for sure.
Yeah.
And, at a certain point, you just kind of wonder how much worse does it get, before it gets better, if it even gets better at all. Because, they've been on a real slide. Because as I mentioned, they've lost 6 of their last 8 games, right? At one point, they were like, maybe like a week and a half ago, they were like in the top 3 or 4 in the West. And now they've dropped all the way down back to 9, which is pretty much where they've been, right, the last couple of seasons, somewhere in that play-in spot.
Yeah.
So now we're moving on to the Denver Nuggets. Denver Nuggets had a weird stretch of games recently, right, where right before we got on, right, they had just got blown out by the Cleveland Cavaliers. They kind of cut it to a single-digit game and made it a game, but you knew they weren't going to win. After, right, having a big NBA Cup win against the Golden State Warriors, right, where, we've kind of seen the script for that, right, where in the minutes that Jokic plays, the Nuggets were really good, and then in the minutes he was off the floor, at least against the Warriors, they were garbage. I mean, he was plus 23 in 40 minutes in a 4-point win against Golden State, right? So that lets you know when he was off the floor, it turned to, horrificness. Now in this game, plus minus not really so good for him, although the Cavs are very good. But for the Nuggets, it's just been such a strange, bizarre season for them because now, to be fair, I think once they lost KCP, I think we were definitely lower on this team. I mean, and to be fair, like Christian Brown has played well, but you still have this issue of all right, Jokic is putting up great numbers, right? Having a career year. A lot of people think he's, the front runner for MVP, or at least, now that Giannis has entered the chat, a lot of people still think he's, the number one guy. But, then you look around, Gordon, he got hurt, but prior to that injury, and since he's come back, he's played well. Michael Porter Jr. has honestly played well. Westbrook, after his rough start to the season, he's been better off the bench, right? Peyton Watson, not good tonight against the Cavs, right? But he's, had a decent season. But then you still look at Jamal Murray, right? And, he had that moment against Golden State where, he blocks Kuminga on the dunk, right? He got to the free throw line and, made a couple of big plays. But overall, just not a great season for him. I know his plus minus, is, pretty solid. It's better than it was last season, if I'm not mistaken. But when you watch him play out there, he just doesn't look the same. And maybe part of it is just he's just not hitting his shots. Like last season, he was 48 from the field, 42.5% from three. Right now, he's at 42 from the field and 33% from three. So, not really loving that, right? True shooting percentage, if you want to look at that, right? That's way down. It's like, barely above 50%, which is not really good, which is not a good thing. But it's just rough because like that's kind of the guy that we talked about for the Nuggets where despite losing KCP, if Jamal Murray plays at the level that we've seen him play at, when they won the title, Denver can still be a really good team, right? Still a very effective team. It's not like you're picking them to win the West, but they could at least be in that dark horse category. If they get hot, if they get the right matchups, they could make it. But if this is the Jamal Murray you're gonna get, and hopefully it gets better, but if that's the version you're gonna get, you just have no chance because that's the guy that kind of breaks the other team's defenses, right? Outside of Jokic, because they have a great chemistry, great two-man game together, right? They can, they effectively play off each other as good as any two guys in the league, but he just hasn't been himself. And, hopefully, like I said, he can get to that. I don't know if he's just playing his way into shape. I don't know if he's just washed. I'm not sure, right? Because I'm not ready to just like completely give up. But at the same time, it's got to be better than what we're seeing, especially like say against the Warriors in crunch time. They were basically making it a mission to just target him on defense, where every play, Steph is basically calling for a switch, and then they're getting Jamal Murray on him. Now, I mean, Steph wasn't really good in that game, but just in general, it's just kind of something that you have to notice because like say he's never been a great defender, but I think we've seen better than this. But also, like you could get away with okay defense when he was giving you the offense that we've been accustomed to seeing, right? Like last season, he had a great regular season, probably the best of his career. But this season it's just not been enough, and it's not on one person. Like the bench also, as we've discussed, has been awful, regardless of the Westbrook signing. Dario Saric has basically been an unplayable guy now, right? Like he was okay for the Warriors last year, at least at the start of the season. Then the second half of the season, he just wasn't a part of the rotation anymore because they didn't really need him. But there's just such a glaring hole in that backup center spot, right? Like Zeke Naji, they can barely play, even though they paid him because he's just unplayable. Especially as a center, right? DeAndre Jordan, obviously at this stage, probably shouldn't be a guy that you want playing a ton. And then obviously the guy that they drafted, Daron Holmes, right? He tore his Achilles in the summer league, so you can't even use him as an option, unfortunately. So, as for them, no backup center, right? Kind of like the Lakers essentially, but they literally have no backup center. I guess DeAndre Jordan kind of counts, but not really just because of the age. So, it's tough. And like, in the Western Conference, again, they're right above the Lakers at 8, right? And like, yeah, because of Jokic, his floor is so high that like they could probably still win a decent amount of games. But in terms of like the actual playoff contender picture, that's where it's kind of hard to feel quite as high on them because I just don't know what I'm going to get with Jamal Murray, and I definitely don't know what I'm getting from the bench because those guys could be good for the team in the regular season, but is there a guarantee that those guys play well in the postseason? Like well enough that they don't completely collapse when Jokic is off the floor? I don't know. I can't really trust it. So, but the main thing is Jamal Murray because you could overcome some of that if he's great, because then he could be the second unit guy, not coming off the bench, but just playing with the second unit guys. But he just hasn't been that guy consistently. And, you're just kind of waiting for it. And like I said, if it doesn't come, then Denver doesn't really have much of a shot just because you need at least another guy next to Jokic that you can kind of consistently rely on. And again, Porter and Gordon have been really good, but Murray's the guy that I think if you can get, he's the swing piece essentially. Like it was like Porter or Gordon, but now since Murray's just not been as good, he's the guy where if he gets back to normal levels for him, then they'll be fine. Like you still probably wouldn't, they still wouldn't be the favorite to come out of the West, but you'd feel much better about them. But right now, I don't really see how you could really feel good about their chances of coming out of there just because they just haven't looked that great. But like again, they're still 4 games or 5 games behind OKC, so that's not terrible. But again, from what I've seen, you know, I just haven't been too pleased with what I've seen from those guys that I mentioned. So hopefully we see it, but I don't know. It's 20 games now at this point.
Yeah, I mean they're in the same boat as the Lakers, to be honest. For me, as good as Russell Westbrook has been, in the solid turnaround and the do-it-all mindset that he's brought to the bench, like you said, you're not getting anything from anybody else. Zeke Naji, Julian Strother, Peyton Watson have all been disappointments. Dario Saric included
No
as well.
defense.
No defense, and when those guys are out there, it's really, I guess, one of the harder watches in the NBA. A lot of those going around, but with Christian Brown, I think he's been pretty good. Jokic has been very good. MPJ pretty solid, and then Aaron Gordon coming off the injury, looking amazing. And then you have Jamal Murray, who's kind of like the odd man out. And I think the problem is you need probably a solid, efficient 20 points from him, on a good day. But you're not getting that at all. You're getting 17, and it's piss poor shooting, like you said, 41% from the field, 30 something from three, and that's just not good. I think he's lost his ability to create space. Said that early on in the season. Very disappointed in that. Not sure if it's injury related or whatever, but the step back doesn't look the same. Some of the tough shot making is still there, but not nearly enough. Like going back to like when they won the title, not that version of Jamal Murray. And I think you need that version of him to even be successful in the postseason at all. And yeah, that guy is not there right now. So we are kind of waiting, like you said, for him to show up. But if he doesn't show up, then I think you can really kiss your title chances goodbye. And no matter who you have on that roster, as long as Jamal Murray's playing like this, I just don't really foresee them winning a title. And it goes back to Jamal Murray in the bench. Like, simple as that. Because I think the starting five outside of him is, you can't really blame them for the woes that are going on in Denver right now.
Right. Yeah. Because, like we talked about, right? Like you're getting good performances out of a number of guys. So it's not like, there's just a whole bunch of guys that are underperforming. It's just as a whole, the team is just not as good. And like I said, if Jamal Murray is good, then, not that you're completely set, but you're close, right? Like you don't feel as bad about the team as we have recently. But that and that's really the question because again, like offensively, the Nuggets have still been good. Like they're not quite at the heights that they were the title year, but like they're seventh in offensive rating. Like so that they still are a top 10 offensive team. But defensively they're 20th, and that's kind of what we talked about, where that just kind of goes to show that you need to be good on both ends of the floor, which we already know. But I think you were just kind of hoping for a little bit more. But I don't know where you get it, right? From the roster as currently constructed, there's not really anybody where you're kind of looking at him and you're just like, yeah, that guy needs to play more so they can get more defensive stops. Like they just don't have it. So maybe they can find a way to get somebody at the deadline. But I mean, have they made any trades really? Like, I mean, I know they did the Reggie Jackson one where they just dumped him, but I think even the year they won the title, they I guess what did they do? They traded for Thomas Bryant, who didn't even really play.
Yeah.
Because he's not a defensive center.
No.
So they haven't really made any trades really to improve the roster in quite some time. I guess they made those trades like during the finals where they got the draft picks or whatever. But Daron Holmes would have been nice as a regular season guy, but obviously you can't pin all your hopes, of a backup center on a rookie. Like, you got to go out and actually have one. And the Sarge signing was just one that was just kind of bizarre, anyways, right? Because, you look at the type of center that they needed off the bench, and it's not really a guy like that. I understand, like, they needed more shooting, right? So, like, even though their offense has been good, the 3-point shooting is still kind of not good enough. And so, like, I guess that's kind of the thought process of a Dario Saric. But I don't know. I just feel like if you're gonna get like a backup center, right, like for the 10 minutes, if that Jokic doesn't play, like I think you would still want him to be more of a defensive minded guy. And then you just kind of hope and pray that, you can get some offense from other guys. But I don't know. I mean, can they swing for a backup scorer off the bench? I know people have talked about the idea of, like, I think there was a discussion at one point that say like a Lonnie Walker, let's say he could kind of be poached from his overseas team. Maybe that happens. And, he was a guy that did help win a playoff game for the Lakers. So, maybe that could work. But, as of right now, off the top of my head, I can't really think of something that they can realistically do right now. I think there's just going to have to be some growing pains. At least now they're playing some of these younger guys, and, they've been all right, I guess, at different points. Like Watson's been fine, but, still, Strother, no defense. He can be a heat check guy, but I think you just like a little bit more on the defensive end from those guys. But I do like Watson's contributions, as a wing, and we've talked about that. But, just I think they still need another piece, and I just don't really know how they get it. And like KCP would have been nice. Obviously, like, then you have to kind of figure out, like, okay, well, Christian Brown's starting. He's clearly good enough to start, right? So, like, would he have come off the bench? If you kept KCP, I mean, like, it's just, I don't know. I know KCP had a rough postseason for them, but, and like, that's, like, let's say if they brought back KCP, like, does that completely solve some of the issues they have? I mean, I think it would help defensively, because even Brown, like, defensively, I think, on the ball, he's fine, but I don't think he's as good as, like, the off-ball chaser stuff that KCP does, and he's a different type of guy, right? Like, he's a stronger, more built, athletic guy, right? But not quite a guy that you can kind of ask to like wiggle around screens and things like that. That's not really his game on the defensive end. But, I don't know. It's just kind of disappointing, right? Because this was the team that I think almost everybody kind of felt like when they won the title, like kind of seemed like the new king of the NBA. But then it kind of just goes to show how fast the NBA changes and moves, because now they're kind of just average, like I guess slightly above average, but like certainly they don't really feel like one of the teams to kind of fear right now. I mean, obviously Jokic is great, but still, it's just not enough.
Yeah, I think even with an addition like Lonnie Walker, I feel like you need more. Um,
Mm.
and I, like you said, I don't know where they would really look to get that from. Especially the big man department, because we already know how scarce that is. And like I said, I think they're really in the same boat as the Lakers. So, just a little bit overrated in my opinion. But the top end talent is so good on that team that you can't necessarily count them out. But you need
Right, and
more from
unlike
Jamal Murray.
yeah, and unlike say like LA, you have a guy who's like in his prime. I mean, I guess like AD like is kind of is still kind of in that prime. He just had the
Yeah,
injuries, but Jokic is considered the best player in the league, right? Which
yeah.
AD and LeBron at this point no longer are considered that. So
Okay,
it's just kind of rough that you have that working for you, but the team still doesn't really look quite like a championship level team.
right.
And again, the West still seems pretty wide open. So it's not like, they have no chance. But as I mentioned, if Jamal Murray can't help you, then you definitely have no chance, right?
Yeah,
That's really to me the thing that you kind of need, because most of these other teams have a pretty comparable good second option next to their star. Like say like OKC, you got SGA, but then you have, Jalen Williams, and then when healthy, Chet Holmgren. Although those guys haven't proven as much in the postseason aside from their run last year. Dallas, you got Luka and Kyrie, right? For the Grizzlies, you got their big three. The Suns, they have their big three. Golden State is kind of the only other one where you're kind of looking at it, and like the second guy isn't quite, to the level that you would probably like. And that's kind of probably going to be the issue for them. We've already talked about them since they've slid. But, but Murray's supposed to be one of those guys. So if, hopefully he can get there. But again, we're a quarter of the way into the season. And, it still kind of looks the same ish, right? Like against certain matchups, he'll look better, right? Like I thought against Cleveland, he looked better than he did against Golden State. I guess because the Cavs guards are smaller, so it's a little bit of a better matchup for him. But still not, dominant enough in a way where like, you wanted to see more. So, and I know he's not like the best guard on the floor because like that's Mitchell, but like still, you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
those guys in theory shouldn't be able to slow him down, even though the Cavs have been, good, really good defensively. I know that. So,
Yes.
um, now we're kind of moving on to the Milwaukee Bucks. This one, I guess, is a happier story. I guess if you want to put it that way, they are 8-2 in their last 10. They just lost the game to the Atlanta Hawks, who have actually also been on an impressive run of their own, right? They're 12-11. The Bucks now are 11-10. And again, big part of that obviously is Giannis's play, right, where he's giving you basically 30 a night, over 30 a night, right? Basically having a career year at the age of 30, which is always nice to see, right? Because he's getting better. Even the mid range, right? That's kind of been something that everybody's been talking about, where all of a sudden he's one of the most deadly mid range scorers in the league, right? He's taking them and he's making them at like what, a 50% clip, 60% from the field, just under 12 rebounds, 6.5 assists, 1.3 blocks. So he's been just ridiculous, right? And he's kind of obviously been the biggest reason for Milwaukee's, kind of return, right? Where they were awful at the beginning of the season. Damian Lillard giving you 26-7, right? So honestly, he's played, I think well, right? Obviously, he's had some other stretches, like, and obviously defensively not great, but I think those two guys are playing at a level where you don't really look at them as the issue. Now you're seeing some life from some other guys, right? Like Brook Lopez, who was terrible to start the season. He's been significantly better as of late, right? And he's obviously a super important piece to that team on both ends of the floor, right? We've talked about him many times where early in the season he looked like he might have been ready for China. Now he looks significantly better. Even some other guys, right? Like Gary Trent Jr. was bad to begin the season. He's been a lot better, right? AJ Green is a guy now they're playing more. Doc Rivers is actually playing more of the young guys. No more Pat Connaughton minutes. Andre Jackson Jr., AJ Green, Gary Trent Jr. Those are the guys you're seeing. Torian Prince, right? Playing under assistant coach Darvin Ham. He's having a really good year, right? I believe he's the league leader in 3-point percentage right now, shooting 56% from three, right? So looking like a quality signing for them. And, just overall on both ends of the floor, they look significantly better, right? Like, because we talked about them earlier in the season, right? Where they just looked atrocious, right? But even the offense, like, wasn't really that great, which was kind of something that was kind of concerning because of the fact that, you know, like this team was supposed to be an offensive minded team and you weren't really getting that. But, now they look a lot more, they look a lot better on both ends of the floor. Like offensively, now they've gotten up to 11th, which, it was not 11th earlier in the season. And then, defensive rating, they're 13th. So now their defensive rating has climbed back up and, they're getting closer and closer to, that coveted top 10 on both ends of the floor. Defensively, I don't know how much higher they'll climb. I think obviously the big piece is Chris Middleton will be back on. Well, you'll be listening to this on Friday. So he's supposed to be back on Friday against the Celtics. So that's kind of a big deal because that guy, essentially was, one of their best players, right? Obviously, he was crucial to their title run a few years ago. Just hasn't been healthy consistently since, right? He did play in the playoffs for them, and he looked pretty good in that postseason, especially given the circumstances. No Giannis, and even for a game or so, no Damian Lillard. So hopefully, if he can be healthy and get kind of close to what he was before, I'm not banking on it or betting on it, but if he can get there, that should help the Milwaukee Bucks. I still don't necessarily know if I can truly say like I feel good about their chances to come out of the East. I still feel like they're still not quite on that level, but at the very least, their floor is significantly higher than what it was before. It's no longer a disaster like it was at the beginning of the season where people are like, are they going to possibly blow this up and, trade Giannis and trade Dame and all that? I think those conversations are 100% done. It's just a matter of, are they actually going to be good enough to kind of fulfill, the championship level basketball play that we saw or that we hope to see from them going into last season? I don't necessarily know about that, but it is great to see that Giannis is having a great year, and he's giving Jokic a run for his money for that MVP battle, right? I wouldn't necessarily completely say that Jokic has got it wrapped up, right? Like now that the Bucks record is significantly better, right? Now they're no longer like, towards the bottom of the East. Now they're fifth. and they're not that far behind from, most of the other teams behind them outside of Cleveland and Boston. That's what you want to see. So you're getting good play out of a number of guys, right? Doc Rivers is doing, kind of figured out which guys to play and which guys to basically shelve. Now you just kind of hope Middleton comes back. He can be closer to what he is. That'll help you at least, on both ends of the floor, right? Offensively, it should help because that's another score. It'll make you deeper. Defensively, we'll see. I mean, maybe you could just make the case that by making their offense better, it'll just help them on defense. I don't know, but hopefully he can stay healthy, and then hopefully maybe they can find some type of move to make at the deadline for, as Shams has mentioned, defensive-minded guards and wings, which we already knew. I mean, that's pretty much what almost every team wants. But for the Bucks, it's a big deal that they've had this turnaround. I know they've had a soft schedule, but these were the type of games they were losing earlier in the season, and now they're getting it done there. So now you just kind of have to get healthy, and then, you just kind of move and see what you can do, which is at least, which is the least you could ask for.
Yeah, for me, context matters, but it's the good kind of context where, in the last 10 games, like you said, the schedule has been very, very freaking soft. Like, you played Detroit twice. You had Charlotte in the mix, Chicago, Indiana, Miami as well, Washington. So, by no means are you playing like some crazy teams. They did beat Houston, who has a very good record, but yeah,
Yeah.
like you said, these were the kind of games that they were losing very early in the series, in the season. Like, going back to October, they lost to Chicago, Brooklyn. Yeah, they were just losing and dropping games left and right. But this is kind of what I expected from the Bucks. To be a little spotty. We knew that they would eventually catch up and get better. Due to the fact that Giannis was playing out of his mind. I believe that was my
Mhm.
pick for MVP. And I thought he was going to have like one of these crazy career seasons. That's kind of what happens when there's a lot of noise surrounding like, top five guys. Normally they respond in a crazy way. It's just the team hadn't really been moving that well as a unit, but now they're winning their kind of must wins and, circle scratch off games where it's like, like if you're looking at it on paper, yeah, that team should beat this team. So they're winning those games, easily winnables. They're not dropping games anymore, so that's a good sign. And yeah, Giannis and Dame, I think the duo is looking better. They're looking more comfortable. There's definitely more chemistry there. And I think when, you see those guys clicking on all cylinders, as a guy who's maybe like a role player, I think that gives you some more confidence to allow you to work a little bit more freely and get to your spots as well. So you're kind of seeing that with other guys on both ends of the floor. And then obviously Doc Rivers, like you said, figuring out the rotation to win these games is definitely a big factor as well. But I think it starts at the top where, it was never Dame and Giannis's fault, but I think them looking better together and looking more, like a duo, that definitely helps for sure.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And that's kind of the key is that, like you said, it starts at the top, right? And those guys with the superstars playing, their stars playing the way they've been playing, then it kind of just makes it easier for everybody else to kind of, get in place and, figure out what they have to do on both ends of the floor. So,
Yes.
it's a good thing to see because again, there was no real reason for them to be as bad as they were to begin the season because say like Philly's situation, right? Like we know Philly, like yeah, maybe if they're healthy they could make some noise but their record is what it is, right? What are they? I mean, I think they're 5-15, so they're 10 games below 500. But you can also say like, well, they were without most of their three main guys for most of the season. But for the Bucks, Lillard did have a concussion, so he missed a handful of games. But regardless, they still had Giannis and Lillard for most of the season. And their schedule wasn't really that difficult. And I mean, they had a couple of Cleveland games and a couple of Boston games, but like, which are tough matchups. But still, there wasn't a reason for the record to be as bad as it was. But now, they figured a lot of that stuff out. So I guess the question is that again, say Middleton comes back, you know, and he plays well, and maybe he looks, not quite as good as what he was before. But let's say he still looks good, right? Would that change your outlook possibly for the Bucks being able to realistically come out of the East, or is it more so just they'd be more of a threat, but probably not able to upset, the Boston Celtics, right? Because that's, I think even though the Cavs have been great, I think the Celtics are still the favorite, despite the Cavs playing as well as they played.
Yeah, I don't think the Bucks could take Boston in a 7-game series. I think you have Giannis, and that's amazing what he can do. But I just think defensively, as currently constructed, even with or without Middleton, I just don't think that they can get over that hump. Um, you know, Boston is notorious for, you know, prioritizing the three ball. And I think if you don't have the personnel to kind of stop that on the perimeter, I think you might be in trouble. And I think they're gonna take advantage of a couple of things. They're gonna take advantage of that, and then obviously I think Brooke Lopez's age will definitely show in the postseason. And another thing, I think the Bucks have to be healthy as well, because I think something that's kind of held them back the past couple of
Right.
seasons going into the postseason has definitely been their lack of health towards the end of the
100.
season. Like when Giannis is banged up and is in and out, that's never a good sign. I think especially in the
Yeah.
first round. So I guess if you're a Bucks fan, you're definitely praying and hoping that Giannis is going to be healthy and can actually play like a full 7-game series.
Right.
Um, like it wouldn't surprise me if like they somehow like beat Cleveland or something, and it's like I don't know, the conference finals or something like that, and it's Boston Milwaukee. But I just don't think that they could represent the Eastern Conference. I just don't see it defensively. I don't see it. Although they have looked a
Yeah.
little bit better.
Yeah, and the health factor, like you mentioned, is fair because they've had what basically three straight postseasons where a key guy was just gone, right? Because you go back to 2022, that's the year after they won the title, right? Chris Middleton gets hurt against the Celtics,
Hmm.
and then they lose that series, and a series that they probably I think would have been able to win, if Middleton was there. And then obviously in 2023, right? That's the Nuggets year. That's the year the Heat represented the East, right? Obviously, Giannis missed a couple of those games. I know he played in some of those games, but there were a couple of games where he wasn't available, and I know they won some of the ones he played, but
Yeah,
still. And then obviously last season he didn't play at all, right,
yeah.
against the Pacers, right? So, and that's kind of the rough part is that like now he's kind of in a spot where could he be a little bit more? And I mean, like he hasn't even missed that many games this season, but
Mm.
we know like for the postseason he hasn't been as available, and that's obviously kind of a key here because he still has a ridiculously high workload.
Yeah,
And so being able to keep him fresh over the course of the season, right? That's something that you have to consider because he's your key, right? Because against the Celtics, that's kind of your hope is that, like, say, Giannis could be the best player on the floor there, and he's a guy that because he can just be such a battering ram, he could possibly just kind of overwhelm the Celtics, inside
true.
defensively, right? And maybe put some guys in foul trouble, right? Lillard, maybe he gets to the free throw line a ton. That's kind of your hope, I think, in order to counter Boston. Because, like defensively, yeah, they're probably not going to be able to guard Tatum and Brown. So I think that's the hope. But I'm kind of with you where I feel like it's hard to write off Giannis, but I just don't necessarily know if they're going to be able to pull off the upset against the Celtics, especially with, the health concerns cuz I just can't trust these guys to stay healthy, right? Like say with the Celtics, can you trust Porzingis to stay healthy? Probably not. But you can trust Tatum and Brown for the most part to stay healthy, and those are your two main guys, right? But for the Bucks, you can't trust Middleton to stay healthy. And even Giannis, I don't really know if I can trust it. I mean, like you just don't know. Like hopefully it happens this year in terms of health where they are healthy, and then we can get like a real evaluation of what it looks like because we just didn't get to have that the last couple of postseasons, right? Like I
Yeah.
don't think like obviously we knew like I think we knew going into the playoffs that the Bucks probably just weren't going to have it. Even before the Giannis injury in the regular season, but it would have been nice to have seen what a healthy Giannis Milwaukee group would have looked like against the Pacers. But, we didn't really get that chance, and that's kind of unfortunate, just because of the fact that, he's one of the best players in the NBA, right? And, at one point he was considered the best, right? But he hasn't really been able to claim it because he's been hurt.
Yeah, yeah.
And his team hasn't had as much success because of that in the last few years. So, we'll see if he can get back on track, and see what happens. But it still feels like the Celtics are kind of still the kings of the East. Although again, the Cavs, they've been really good, so I can't completely rule it out, but I still feel like at full strength, I would still take the Celtics over the
Yeah.
Cavs. Just
Agreed.
you know what I mean? Like I'm not saying they can't. And obviously for the Cavs, if you can stay ahead of Boston and get home court, that would be major, right? Because they're right there with Cleveland. They split the season series, right? They're 1-1. So and that could matter as the season goes on. But
Yeah, I want to
for
see
the
a 7-game series between the Celtics and Cavs. Like that'll be kind of like the be all end all test, you know?
Yeah, because I mean, like the Knicks, obviously they're good. I still kind of worry about their defense because their defense hasn't necessarily been the best. Although I think it could get better when they get the big reinforcements. So there's something to look forward to there. And then for the Magic, obviously they haven't even had Paolo, but they've still been really good. And it's just kind of a matter of can Franz keep up that play. And we've talked about it, but we'll see what happens with the Bucks because this is mainly a Bucks discussion.
Yeah, sorry.
Now we're gonna get into and close out, just kind of with some news and rumors. Obviously, now we're in December, right? December 15th is kind of the first date that teams can kind of start trading away guys that they signed, right? So we'll kind of see what happens there. But there's kind of been a number of things that have come out from a number of sources. Shams, Pelicans won't waive Zion. Don't really need to focus on that. Didn't really think it was going to happen. For BI, Brandon Ingram, according to Shams, he wants a winning environment. So basically, what Shams has reported is that they're either going to trade him or they're going to extend him, which so hopefully that means that they're not going to just let him walk. Although we've seen with the new CBA, some teams have done that, but it hasn't really been with a guy I don't think of Ingram's caliber, right? Because like say Klay Thompson and Chris Paul, Golden State let walk, but those guys aren't on Ingram's level at this point. Same with like KCP.
Paul George.
Yeah, Paul George, I guess, is the other one for sure. He's just the issues with his age.
Yeah.
So that's a little bit different. But yeah, Paul George would be the other one. But kind of interesting, right? Because for the Pelicans, before we got on, right, a number of their guys came back, right? Like Herb Jones and a couple other guys, and they pulled off an upset win over the Suns. Now, to be fair, the Suns, which we hadn't mentioned, right, they're going to be without Durant for at least a week because I think he hurt his ankle in the game against the Spurs, right? But if you're the Pelicans, I guess what do we kind of expect them to do? Because if it's gonna be one of those two options, either trade him or agree to an extension, which one is it? Because we still don't really have like a team that has been come out where it's like, oh, they're rumored to be like a suitor for Ingram. I know that there are teams like in theory that could go after him if they're interested, but we don't really have like an actual report of like, oh yeah, this team, is a legitimate suitor to get him, right? Because we know like there are teams that like say like I don't know, like LA or Golden State or others, right? But we haven't actually heard anything about them going after him. Maybe they are, but what do we think? Because like this one is kind of a tough one, to really figure out just because of, I think we kind of thought that they would trade him in the offseason and then they didn't. And I don't know if they're going to extend him, but I also don't really know if a team is just going to come out and trade for him. I think it kind of depends on, whether or not teams give up something that they're okay with giving up. Because I mean, if you're the Pelicans, would you love the idea of just dumping Ingram for a mediocre return? I don't know. What do you think?
I think that we're probably looking at an extension. I don't think that there's ever really been a market for Brandon Ingram. As far as we know, the reporting on it has been very spotty. Not a lot of reports on, even like hypotheticals really. So I think we'll be looking at an extension because I think in theory this roster can really work if they can stay healthy. And I think, a lot of people are probably not quite ready to give up on the Pelicans and what they can potentially be if fully healthy. Because I think they have like a decent amount of like top end talent. But a lot of the guys just are prone to missing some time. And I think when they're all missing time and it adds up, it makes it look way worse than it actually is.
Yeah. Now they did also mention McCollum could be a guy that they could also move, and I think that's definitely one if you're New Orleans to look at because you got Dejounte Murray, so you don't really need both him and
Yeah.
McCollum, right? So that way you can have like Herb Jones and Zion and Murphy, and Yves Missi honestly has been a lot better than I think we expected because I think our expectation was that he was going to be pretty raw, but he's honestly looked pretty comfortable out there. Yeah, obviously he's not like a floor spacer or anything, but he's still like a solid center for them. Like some people have compared him to like a Clint Capella, but if you're the Pelican, yeah, I don't know. I don't really know what to think of this one because then there's also like the fact that like okay, it's been so quiet that maybe there actually is something in the works, because some of the other deals that we heard about, like marketing, we heard so much about it that it ended up just not happening because too much was being discussed. Like the ones that are the most quiet tend to sometimes be the ones that actually work. But I just don't know, because again, mainly because I can't think of a team where there's like an obvious, like, oh yeah, this is an obvious deal. Like I know teams that, like, yeah, if they can get him, should try to get him, but there's not like an obvious package where I'm like, oh, if I'm New Orleans, I'm jumping on this one too. And I think that's kind of the tough part where, like, again, if you're New Orleans, do you actually want to, just take him for like very little? Like people have mentioned, like, what if the Lakers got Brandon Ingram? But it's like, you know, if you're New Orleans, you're essentially, unless you're asking for like a Dalton Connect or an Austin Reeves, which I don't think the Lakers would give up, you're essentially looking at like what, like Rui, you know, D'Lo, Gabe Vincent, like those tier of guys. And like if you're New Orleans, like I mean, like why would you do that? You know what I
Yeah,
mean? So
yeah,
that's kind of the issue there. And then, like for Golden State, okay, maybe you could talk yourself into like I don't know, Kaminga, Pods, something like that. I don't know, but like that's kind, and it's like you know what I mean. There's not an obvious fit, and that's kind of the issue there, where it's like we know he's good, right? But in this environment, it doesn't seem like teams are really going to be that willing to pay him the max. So he may just be stuck, and they might just kind of be forced to extend him. But I don't even know if that's what they even really want to do. So that's the problem. But I think at the very least, you should definitely, worst case scenario, explore McCollum for sure, right? And again, not that he's bad, but you just don't really need him since you got DeJounte Murray, right? I think I would rather, have a defensive minded guy like a Herb Jones, right, who basically saved the day for the Pelicans by getting the game winning block against the Suns. Like, you'd rather have that next to Murray than McCollum, because Murray at this point doesn't seem defensively like what, he was in San Antonio. But you could offset that, by having Herb Jones out there. So we'll see. I'm not. I don't know about that one. Like this could be one that just goes like all the way down to the wire.
yeah,
And then after that, more stuff from Hoops Hype. Right, Terry Rozier, possible trade candidate. Which I guess that means they're not super happy with that. Um, Alongside Jimmy and team's future first round picks. I mean, the Heat have been what, they're 10-10 after the Lakers win, so they've been basically average. So they don't really look like a contender, but they also don't look like one of the worst teams in the NBA. But then, like, even, you know what I mean? So it's like they're kind of in a spot where, like, yeah, if like we've talked about it, like if you can trade Butler and you can get something, anything, like you might as well. But like
yeah.
obviously, like Rozier, I'm curious what his market would be. I don't know. He doesn't even start for them at this point, right? Like, because
No,
in the game that I saw the other day, like it was Hero at point guard. So next to Duncan Robinson, and I know like he's also been hurt at different points, so maybe that's part of it. I don't know. Maybe he's on a minute restriction. But just yeah, like the Heat group kind of just seems like it's kind of just run its course, which
yeah,
is I think kind of what we thought anyways after last season.
yeah. Agreed. I think that it's the end of an era. It's time to bring in either another co-star for Bam or let Bam take the reins. I think Tyler Hero's actually been pretty good this season, but yeah, I'm not too high on Jimmy Butler at the moment, and I mean, we'll see
Yeah,
once it gets to the postseason, but I doubt they really do a whole lot. Yeah, kind of run in the mill, very very average for the Miami Heat.
yeah, and then the hoop side, Michael Scotto kind of mentioned that like there's been quiet discourse about maybe the Rockets or the Mavs getting Butler. The Rockets one, I don't really understand that, because I just think if you're gonna move your young guys, you should move him for a younger star, not like an older guy.
Hmm.
The Mavs, okay, I could see that just because like it's a he's like still like a star forward, and I guess like there are guys where it's like, oh, we don't really care too much about giving up those guys because like we could get Jimmy Butler. So I could see that. It would
Hmm.
be weird, but at least I could understand it. Like, but the Rockets one, I don't really understand.
Yeah, I agree. I would I would throw the Rockets one in the trash already. I don't even need to know the details, but the Mavs one I think would pique my interest, and I'd be curious what that package would be.
Yeah. And again, these are just kind of rumors, right? So that obviously doesn't necessarily mean that things are going to happen, but,
Yeah.
just things to talk about. And then obviously the last couple of things, right? Moses Moody, a name to monitor ahead of the deadline. Not really a surprise. I mean, he barely plays consistently, honestly. Despite him being in his fourth year in the NBA, and they just signed him to a relatively modest extension, right? 3 years, 37.5 million. So, math wise, you're talking about like 12 and a half or so a year. Um, I think he's got the poison pill thing, right? So that basically means that if they trade him, then then the amount of salary that that the other team takes back is like the average of his new deal, as opposed to the money he's making right now in his rookie deal. So that's why they call it poison pill, because it's a little bit tougher to deal. But I just don't know what the package is. Like, I don't know who's available in terms of who they could get, right? Like, I know they mentioned Kuzma, right, in terms of a guy that the Lakers and Warriors could be linked to. But, like, I mean, is Kuzma the guy that if you're Golden State, like, that's the guy we're missing? Like, I
No,
mean, I don't think so. I mean,
gives
like,
you more
I don't think that.
production, but
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it gives you more production, but I don't think that make really gets you much closer to, what you want. Like, I mean, I guess, like, I mean, even for the Lakers, like, I mean, I guess he's better. He's a better forward than any of the non LeBron forwards they have. But is if that's your only move, are you necessarily satisfied with it? I don't know. I mean, like, you're a Wizards guy, so I mean, I guess you've seen him this season, but also, like, he's on a horrible team. So how much of that is like bad habits on a bad team
yeah,
versus, like, he's just not playing as well? I don't know. And then it's like, if he comes to a good team again, does he carry those bad habits with him? I don't know, because I don't really know what to expect there. But, like, in terms of these names, like, none of these are surprising. These are the same names we talked about like a year ago. You know what I
yeah,
mean? Like, Kuzma, I swear we've been talking about him in terms of trade machine stuff for, like, since he signed his contract, since before he even signed it, right? When he
yes,
was a Wizard, like, before he signed his contract, like 2 seasons ago.
yes,
I think actually, when he was a free agent, there was a time where, like, I think some people thought he might just leave and go to Sacramento,
yeah,
right? And stuff like that. That didn't end up happening because he ended up, I guess, because they ended up bringing back that core, right? But either way, I don't know.
yeah. As a Wizards fan, get him off my team, honestly. And I'm not saying like he's complete garbage or anything like that. I know he's had some health issues and stuff. But
Doesn't fit.
the production is not good. 27% from the 3-point line, 42% from the field. So
Yeah. And
yeah,
that's the part where you kind of wonder, because I know he's efficiency wise, he's a guy that's been a little up and down at different points in his
yeah,
career. So if you're getting, the version of him where he's like, closer to 50, like 45, 46, 47, and then like 38 from three,
yeah,
then that's cool, right? Because then he can be like a volume scorer guy that's got some rebounding, got some
yeah.
playmaking,
And he has
and can
gotten better at
sometimes.
passing. Not this season. The
Exactly.
last season, I
Right.
think he looked. Um, that might have been the best Kuzma I've ever seen in my life. Which
Yeah, and like yeah, and
take
like
it for what you want. But you know,
right, and like that's the point where, but versus, like, if it's like this version of Kuzma, then yeah. So that's kind of always the question, is like, for these guys that are on bad teams, that maybe their numbers don't look amazing, how much of it is that they're on a bad team, right? Like, say even like a PJ Washington, right? Like when the Mavs traded for him, right? There were people that were like, why are they trading for this guy? His numbers are kind of like, like he was kind of regarded as like an player, but now he's been playing great for the Mavs, and this season in particular, he's had a great season for them, especially defensively. So so it's always worth it, like, to kind of try to take a shot at these type of players.
yeah,
But say for Kuzma, we had already seen him on a championship team. It's not like he's, an unknown guy that's never been on a winning team.
yeah,
So that's a
yeah,
little bit different. But when he was on those teams, he wasn't this guy.
yeah,
So that's a little bit right, because like when he first came in the league, he was a scorer. Then he had to adjust because then they brought in AD. You weren't going to get the same type of touches, and he did make some adjustments to his play. But now he's a guy where, like, I don't think he would do that again. I
no,
think he would want to be more of like, a go-to featured guy. You know what I
yeah,
mean? So that would be kind of interesting to see what it looks like on, a better team.
yeah.
Well, that's it for today's episode of Off Ball Takes. Again, let us know your thoughts on, the Lakers, the Nuggets, and the Milwaukee Bucks, and let us know your take on some of these other situations going around in the NBA. Obviously, the NBA Cup still going strong, right? They got the quarterfinals coming up next week, so obviously we'll talk about that the next time we have, an episode to record, right? because the NBA Cup is almost over. So a lot of stuff to talk about going on in the NBA. We're basically over a month into the season, so we'll probably kind of start discussing, maybe some of these teams that, kind of who's got it and who's not. But either way, continue to like, comment, and subscribe. Help us grow the channel, and we'll see you next episode.